Hello everyone, welcome to Malim Chess Kids. Today we show the gameplay by Enrique and Sonia. In this game, the game started out with pawn to d4, d5, c4, e6, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight to c3 and knight to f6. Bishop to g5, pinning the knight and with the idea of moving the bishop to h4 and g3, and then the bishop will be able to attack the pawn at c7 and bring out the knight to c3, b5, and attack the c7 and fork the king and the rook. Then c6 by the black to prevent the knight to move to b5. e3, knight b to d7, bishop to d3, bishop to d6, queen to c2, and here you bring out the diagonal and the queen able to attack the pawn at h7, h6 to chase away the bishop, and bishop to h4 and casting from the black, and knight g to e2, and this allowed the king to casting either the king side or the queen side. Then rook to e8 and a long casting from the white. And in this situation, the black has slightly better, or the position is equal. Then the game continue. Queen to a5 with the idea of attacking the a2 pawn. King to e1, b5 to attack, to have the idea of pushing out the pawn and attack the knight. And since the king is in this area, so the black will continue to give pressure on the white side. And since the black king is at this king side, then the white will have the idea of moving the pawn and attack with the king side. So the white play g4 and black continue to play g5. So this g5 is quite a risky move, as it's open up the king structure and it gives the king very open and easy for the white to have a check. Then the game continue, bishop to g3 and to allow the h4 pawn and attack the pawn at g5. Then the black play bishop to f8 and h4 from the white and b4 to attack the knight. Therefore, the white continue to capture the pawn, h takes g5 and attacking the knight. So h takes g5, and here you have this rook is very active and controlling the h file. Then knight to a4 to prevent the queen to attack the a2 pawn, and c5 from the black. And in this situation, you have a very strong attacking, because the bishop can go to h7 and check the king. So in the actual game, white play bishop to h7 and check the king, and if the black capture the bishop, then the queen will capture and there will be a checkmate. If the king move to h8, then you have a discover check, bishop to e4 and capture back the pawn. And if the king move to g8, then you can just capture the pawn. And here white is clearly winning. And if the knight capture the bishop, then again you have queen to c7 and this is a checkmate. So after bishop e4, if the king go to g7, then you can just capture the pawn, and if the knight to capture, then the queen will come to queen to f5 and take the pawn, and there will be another checkmate in 5. For example, queen to f5, then anything from the black queen will just capture the pawn and checkmate. So if the knight to c3 and check, then you bring the knight at e to capture back the knight, then knight to e5, and you can have bishop capture the knight and check with the rook to capture, and you have rook to h7 check, king to g8, and you have queen takes f7 checkmate. So in the actual game, after bishop check, black play king to g7, and here white is very clearly winning in this position because the king is very dangerous in this position. And after this, then you have just bring your queen with the idea of to h5 and capture the pawn. So in the actual game, the white play queen to f5, and in order to protect the pawn, the black play knight to e4 and protecting the pawn. So the black play knight to e4. So in this position, I give you a couple of seconds to figure out what is the best move or idea from the white. Well, congratulations for those who found the answer, and for those who like to enjoy the show, here are the moves played by the white. The white because the queen can check, take the pawn and checkmate. Therefore, in order to protect the f7 pawn, if you move rook to e6, then the rook will go to h7 and check the king. And if the king move to g8, then the bishop will capture the pawn and check the king. And the rook is protected by the queen. And therefore, you have no choice. If the rook capture the bishop, then you use the queen to checkmate. So, in the actual game, the black play knight to d2 and check the king. And any move from the white king to a1 or c1, they will be the winning for the white. For example, in the actual game, white play king to c1, and here black resign as there is no defense for the check of the queen or check of the rook. So if the game to continue, knight to b3 and check the king, then we just capture with the pawn, a takes b3, and then knight to f6 to prevent the check from the rook. Then you can just sacrifice rook h7 and check the king. And if the knight to capture the rook, then you can have queen takes the pawn and check the king. And if the king go to either these two square, and the queen will just simply capture the knight and checkmate. For example, king to h8, then queen capture the knight and checkmate. So if the king to h6, then the queen capture the knight and checkmate again. So after rook h7 check, and if the king move to g8, then you just have a simple checkmate with the bishop by playing bishop takes f7 checkmate. And with this, thank you.